Greetings fellow painters, Train here. Today we paint Cthulhu for your Cthulhu Death May Die board game. Cthulhu will be painted first in its entirety without an OSL effect. Then, if you're feeling up to it, at the end of the video I'll show you how to get this cool purple backlight glow that will really make your miniature pop on the table. A basic black prime miniature will be the starting point for our painting. Then we're going to grab some black green by Monument Hobbies and apply this to every part of the model. And yes, I mean every part of the model, including the wings and tentacles, even though those will later be a different color. With this first pass of the black green, we're really making sure to work it into all the nooks and crannies of this model, sort of like buttering an English muffin. We want to make sure that we don't have any pure black primer showing through. This would have been much easier with an airbrush, but I was determined not to use one for this paint job. We'll see how well that idea holds up. The second application of black green is going to go much faster. Since we want most of the deep recesses to remain in shadow, we're going to use a much larger brush and apply it with a heavy dry brush technique. The final application of black green will be applied in a more controlled manner to the areas that we want to appear the brightest. Since I want the light source to be coming from Cthulhu's right, I'm going to focus most of my attention to the right side of the model. Dark yellow green by Monument Hobbies is the color of choice to begin highlighting Cthulhu's skin. We'll first map out all of the areas that we want to highlight with a quick dry brush. I normally don't care much for dry brushing, but because of the amount of texture on this model, this is the only sane way to do it. And it probably looks like I'm applying way too much of this light green in these shots, but it's going to dry much darker than when it's first applied. Switching to a smaller brush and sticking with the same dark yellow green, we're going to begin building up the highlights on the upward right facing areas of the model. And now is when I really start to pay attention to my brush strokes. Since more paint will be deposited at the end of each brush stroke, I make sure to draw each stroke towards the area that I want to be the brightest. It will take 2 or 3 coats to reach an intensity that we're happy with. Just be sure to wait until the paint is completely dry before you evaluate this, as it does look much darker when dry. And this is where I deviate from the plan and go full airbrush on the wings. And this makes no sense at all because this is probably the easiest part of the project to accomplish with a standard brush. So by all means, just do that if that's what you're comfortable with. I'm starting with the basic skin tone by Vallejo, and I'm adding it to both sides of each wing. And I'm doing both sides because I want the wings to appear somewhat translucent. The idea here is that I'm going to lay down some foundational colors on the wings and the tentacles, starting with a basic skin tone, then a muted pink, followed by a muted purple, and then I want to apply a dark purple oil paint wash that will add contrast and bring out the details in the wings. This is something I've never done before and I'm interested in trying, especially since I still have a whole bunch of old oil paints lying around from when I was painting on canvas in the 90s. I guess we'll see if I stick to the plan this time or if I abandon the oil wash for something else. Also, if you'll notice, I'm getting a little bit of overspray here on the areas that I've already painted, and as soon as I decided to go with the airbrush, I made the decision to stop painting the rest of the model just in case it got ruined by the airbrush work. With the airbrush work out of the way, we switched to Necromancer Cloak by the Army Painter to paint all of the little wing fingers and claws, as well as the little baby arms that are growing out of his back. This very dark gray color applied right next to the pink and purple of the wings really makes them start to pop, and I'm going to do very little to highlight this color going forward. And then we're going to give Cthulhu a quick mani-pedi before moving on to the next part of the process. And right now is when I should be showing you how to make an oil wash, but instead I will be making a wash out of this glaze medium and muted violet. And for this I'm using 4 drops of glaze medium for every 2 drops of the muted violet ink. And it turns out that I'm fortunate to have abandoned the oil wash idea. I had intended to use this glaze wash in the same way that I would use an oil wash on the wings, with the main difference being that rather than applying the wash over the entire wing area and letting it dry for a bit and then removing it with mineral spirits as I would with an oil wash, with this acrylic wash I applied it to a very small area and then used a clean brush to pick up the excess. As I did this over the areas that I had airbrushed with inks on the wings, I noticed that as I drew up the excess wash, it was also removing the muted violet and muted pink inks that were applied with the airbrush. So that's how I ended up with the application here, where I'm applying the wash just to the fingers of the wings and allowing it to bleed a little bit onto the skin of the wings. And then I carefully apply the muted violet glaze wash to the folds and creases of the wings to give it a veiny appearance. And then I go kinda nuts applying this glaze wash to the rest of the model as well. This means that I will have to go back and establish some of those green midtones, starting with the dark yellow green and the black green in about a 50-50 mix. I'm just going to hit the high points across various parts of this model, mostly the upward right facing areas of this model. It's a darn good thing I enjoy the painting process, because I have doubled my work with this move. Next up, we go back to the dark yellow green on its own and continue the highlighting process. We're going to follow the exact same approach as we did earlier, where we're going to draw each brush stroke towards the area that we want to be the lightest. And this is the perfect time for one of those classic do as I say, not as I do moments. If I were to do this again, I would have base coated the entire miniature in the black green, then went and worked on the wings, applied the wash, and then started the highlighting process with a mix of the dark yellow green and black green, as we did here after we finished up the wings. We will continue highlighting by adding pale yellow to the dark yellow green. This mix will be added to the same areas where we had previously placed the dark yellow green, applying it to a smaller and smaller area with each coat. This is applied with controlled strokes, always moving in the same direction for each part of the model. When highlighting a miniature, we're doing more than just establishing where the light source is coming from. We can also use highlighting to build volume on the different features of the model, as well as create some texture. Our final highlight will be applied with pure pale yellow by Monument Hobbies. We will use short strokes and stippling to accentuate key features of the model. Once you feel like your highlighting is complete, it's a good idea to remove the miniature from under the bright painting lights and view it in a more normal ambient light. I can't tell you how many times I've taken a model that I'm proud of directly from the painting table to show it off to my wife, and she says, "Mas luz, cabrón," which she tells me is Spanish for, "Make it brighter, you handsome devil." So I make it brighter. Next, we take Uniform Gray by the Army Painter and add some simple highlights to Cthulhu's nose and nails, which have previously been base coated with Necromancer Cloak. We will do the same for the wing fingers and little arms growing out of Cthulhu's back. Just be sure not to bring the highlights up too far because we want to maintain a high contrast between the Necromancer Cloak and the bright colors of the wings. Ash Gray by the Army Painter will be used as a final highlight for Cthulhu's nose and nails. However, this will not be used on the other gray parts, such as the little arms growing out of Cthulhu's back or the wing fingers. We will use titanium white ink by Liquitex to establish the base for Cthulhu's bright red eyes, for which we will use Fluorescent Red by Dale Rowney. Just be sure to get all 4 of Cthulhu's eyes on each side of his face. A final dot of titanium white will finish off the eyes. The final touch for painting Cthulhu is to paint his wounds. We're going to take Mahogany by Monument Hobbies and base coat the inside of each wound with this color, followed by using Pure Red by Army Painter to highlight the inside of these wounds. For most of the wounds, we'll be focusing on the bottom half of the wound that would catch the most light, and that is where we will apply the Pure Red. If you are interested in the OSL, this is where we will use Matte Black and Purple by Vallejo through an airbrush to map out the purple backlight glow. It will be applied to Cthulhu's back, bottom, left side, as well as the left side of the right hand. We will then return to using a standard brush and the color purple by Vallejo to highlight the inside of these dark regions that we created. To complete the backlight glow, we will use a mix of titanium white and purple by Vallejo, applied to a further reduced area of the purple and focusing on the features of the model that would catch the most light. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to get more of my upcoming painting tutorials for Cthulhu Death May Die.